"Sir, could you give my little brother some milk? He's hungry, and I promise you, when I grow up, I'll pay you back." The words were a ghost on the wind, a whisper from a child who shouldn't have been there. She stood at the edge of the clearing, a tiny figure holding a bundle that seemed heavier than she was. Tennyson, the Apache who lived between worlds, felt a shift in the air. He didn't know it yet, but he was staring at a choice that would unravel a secret buried so deep it could destroy a whole town. This was the winter of 1873. The cold winds that whipped through San Pedro del Monte weren't just carrying sand, they were carrying ghosts. From the door of his lonely cabin, Tennyson watched the sun bleed out over the mountains. His hands, scarred from battles he no longer spoke of, wrapped around a cup of hot tea. He was 35, the last man of the Tubac tribe living among the white settlers. A diplomat, a bridge. That's what his chief had called him. But to most folks in town, he was just the savage Apache, a man to be watched, not trusted. His cabin stood apart, close enough for duty, but far enough for peace. Just as the last sliver of sun vanished, he heard it. A dragging sound. The footsteps of someone who had walked past the point of exhaustion and was now running on pure will. Then he saw her. A girl, no more than 7. Her hair was a wild, tangled mess. Her dress was a patchwork of forgotten fabrics. Her feet were bare, caked in dust and blood from a journey that must have been miles long. But it was the bundle in her arms that seized his attention. A baby, wrapped in rags, so still it was hard to tell if it was even breathing. "Sir," she said again, her voice steady despite her cracked lips. She didn't move closer. She was like a cornered animal, calculating her chances. "Could you give my brother some milk? He's hungry, I promise. I'll pay you back when I grow up." Tennyson lowered his cup. Years of living on the edge had taught him to read people like tracks in the dirt. This girl wasn't just desperate, she was proud. She wasn't begging. She was making a deal. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "Nayeli," she replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "And this is Teayotsin. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Without another word, Tennyson went inside. He returned with a bowl of warm goat's milk and a thick slice of bread. Nayeli took the bowl with hands that trembled, but she didn't drink. Instead, she dipped a strip of cloth from the baby's blanket into the milk and gently pressed it to her brother's lips. The baby stirred, making a faint, weak noise. He was alive. For now. "Where is your mother, Nayeli?" Tennyson asked. The girl's eyes went distant, looking past him toward the dark woods. "She's sick," she said finally. "Sick inside. She doesn't talk anymore. Sometimes she looks right through us." "And your father?" The girl's face hardened. It was a look no child should ever wear. "He left. After he hurt Mama. I don't know why he hurt her, but I remember everything." A familiar coldness settled in Tennyson's gut. He had seen that look in the eyes of his own people, in women broken by men who thought cruelty was strength. This wasn't just a story of poverty. This was something darker. "Can you take me to her?" he asked gently. Nayeli studied his face for a long, silent moment. She was weighing the fate of her family on this one decision. Finally, with a slow, deliberate motion, she nodded. She was trusting him. But what she was leading him to was a horror he could have never imagined. The forest was dead silent as they walked. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves and the baby's shallow breaths. Nayeli moved with a certainty that was chilling, navigating a path that wasn't really a path at all. The moon rose, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. They arrived at a hollow, a dip in the earth where a structure stood in ruins. It might have been a cabin once. Now it was just 4 cracked adobe walls with a caved-in roof. A filthy blanket hung over the doorway. From inside, a faint light flickered. "Mama," Nayeli whispered, her voice barely audible. "I brought help." Tennyson pushed the blanket aside and stepped in. The smell hit him first, sickness and despair. And then he saw her. A young woman, maybe 25, lying on a pile of straw and planks. Her eyes were open but saw nothing. They were fixed on a point in the empty air. Her face, which must have been beautiful once, was a canvas of old, yellowing bruises. One hand was draped over the side of the cot, limp and lifeless. But that wasn't what made his blood run cold. On the dirt floor next to her, there was a dark, dried stain, and near the wall, half hidden in the shadows, lay a man's heavy work boot, its leather scuffed and worn. But the sole of the boot was clean, too clean for the filth of the cabin. It was as if it hadn't been there long. Someone else had been here, recently. "Clara," Nayeli said, touching her mother's arm. "Someone's here." The woman, Clara, didn't move. Her breathing was a shallow whisper. Tennyson had seen this emptiness before, in warriors who had come back from the war with their souls left behind on the battlefield. "Clara," he said, his voice firm but low. "My name is Tennyson. Your children are safe." At the sound of his voice, a flicker of something moved in her eyes. Not life, but maybe the memory of it. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She gave a barely perceptible nod. Tennyson turned to Nayeli. "Is there any food here?" The little girl just shook her head. "It ran out yesterday." He looked from the broken woman to the starving children. He saw the boot in the corner. He felt a presence in the woods, a lingering darkness. This wasn't just a family in need. This was a family on the run. In that moment, he made a decision. An instinct, sharp and certain, the same instinct that had saved his life more than once. "Gather everything you can carry," he said to Nayeli. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Home," Tennyson said. That night, his cabin was no longer the home of a solitary man. It held a broken family. Clara slept near the fire, the children wrapped in his warmest blankets. Tennyson didn't sleep. He sat watching the flames. The image of that single, clean boot burned into his mind. He hadn't just offered shelter. He had stepped into the middle of a war, and the enemy was still out there somewhere in the dark. At dawn, she tried to run. Tennyson was jolted awake by the soft creak of the cabin door. He was on his feet in an instant. Outside, in the damp earth, he saw the tracks. A woman's bare feet, stumbling, and beside them the tiny footprints of a child carrying a heavy bundle. They were heading for the river. He moved through the trees like a shadow, silent and swift. He was a hunter again. He found them not far from the riverbank. Clara was leaning against a tree, shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't from the cold. It was from a terror so deep it had taken root in her bones. Nayeli stood beside her, clutching Teayotsin, her small face a mask of grim determination. "The river is swollen," Tennyson said, stepping out of the trees. He kept his hands open, showing he was not a threat. "It's too dangerous to cross." Clara flinched, her eyes wild like a trapped doe. "We can't stay," she stammered, her voice a raw whisper. "He'll find us. He'll find us here." "Who will find you?" Tennyson asked, keeping his distance. She didn't answer. She just shook her head, a frantic, desperate motion. "This isn't charity," Tennyson said, sitting on the ground a few yards away. "It's survival. For you and for me." Clara stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I have lived alone for 5 years," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying in the still morning air. "I came here on a mission for my people to build a bridge. But in all that time, I have been a man without a tribe, without a family. I am forgetting what a home is for." He looked directly at her. "Maybe you are here to remind me." "We are a burden," she whispered, the words sounding like something she had been told 1,000 times. "We are broken." "Look at your daughter," Tennyson said softly. She walked for miles to save her brother. She faced a stranger and offered a promise instead of begging. Does that sound broken to you? Nayeli took a small step and placed her hand on her mother's arm. Mama, she said, her voice filled with a weariness that was heartbreaking in a child. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being hungry. That was all it took. The simple, honest truth from her child broke through the wall of fear. Clara's shoulders began to shake, and she slid down the trunk of the tree, burying her face in her hands. A sob tore from her throat, a sound of pure, undiluted grief. I don't know how, she wept. I don't know how to be a mother anymore. He took it all from me. You don't have to know today, Tennyson said gently. Just try tomorrow. They returned to the cabin. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the silence of despair, but the fragile silence of a truce. The early days were a delicate dance. Clara spent most of her time by the fire, lost in a world of her own. Nayeli, however, became Tennyson's shadow. She followed him everywhere, her mind a sponge for information. One afternoon, as he was carving a small wooden bird for Teyotzin, she asked him, "Why did your tribe send you away?" "It is an honor," he explained, "to learn the ways of the white man and to teach them ours. But every honor comes with a sacrifice." "What did you sacrifice?" Tennyson's hands paused. "The chance to have a family of my own," he said, the truth of the words surprising him. "The comfort of belonging." Nayeli watched him for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. "Maybe," she said softly, "you don't have to sacrifice that anymore." But that night, the peace was shattered. As Tennyson was banking the fire, he heard a sound outside, a twig snapping. He moved to the window, peering into the moonlit darkness. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then a figure detached itself from the shadows of the trees. A tall man watching the cabin, watching them. Before Tennyson could react, the man was gone, melting back into the forest. He didn't tell Clara what he had seen, but he now knew. The boot in the abandoned cabin, Clara's terror. It all made sense. They hadn't escaped. They had only been given a head start. The next morning, Tennyson found the wooden bird he had carved for Teyotzin lying on the path to the well. It had been snapped in two. It was a message, a threat. He knew he couldn't protect this family alone. He needed help. Not from the town, not from the lawmen who saw him as an outsider. He needed help from his own people. He rode for 2 days, pushing his horse to its limit. He was looking for one person, Naukani, an elder of his tribe, a healer. But she was more than a healer of bodies. She was a mender of spirits. He found her camp by a small hidden spring. She was sitting by a fire, grinding herbs with a stone pestle. "Tennyson," she said without looking up, "the wind told me you were coming." "There is a woman," he said, dispensing with greetings. "Her spirit is broken." Naokani finally looked up. Her eyes were clouded with age, but they saw more than most younger men. "A spirit is not broken by accident, child. It is broken by a person. Who is the one who broke her?" "I don't know his name," Tennyson admitted, "but I have felt his shadow. He is hunting her." The old woman smiled, a grim, knowing smile. "Then you must decide. Are you the man who gives her shelter? Or are you the warrior who will stand between her and the hunter?" She paused, her eyes piercing him. "Because you cannot be both." 3 days later, Naokani arrived at the cabin. She brought with her the scent of sage and the weight of ancient wisdom. Clara was wary, but Naokani wasted no time on pleasantries. She sat across from Clara by the fire, her presence filling the small room. "Child," she said, her voice like stones rumbling, "a man who hurts a woman does not just break her bones. He tries to steal her name. Tell me, what is your name?" Clara frowned. "Clara." "No," Naokani said. "That is the name he calls you. What is the name your mother gave you?" Clara hesitated. Clara Ara Mendoza. Say it again, the old woman commanded. Clara Ara Mendoza. The words were stronger this time. Good, Naokani nodded. The man who haunts you wants you to forget that name. Every time you speak it, you take a piece of your soul back from him. Over the next weeks, Naokani worked her medicine. It was not a medicine of herbs and potions alone. She made Clara Ara walk barefoot in the forest to feel the earth. She made her speak her own name every morning. She made her tell stories to her children, to hear her own voice creating something other than silence. Slowly, painfully, Clara Ara began to return from the empty place she had been hiding. And one night she finally spoke the hunter's name. Baltazar, she said, the name a poison on her tongue. His name is Baltazar Herrera. Tennyson and Naokani sat with her by the fire as the story poured out. He had been charming at first, a handsome man she met at the market. He promised her the world, but the promises turned to poison after Nayeli was born. The drinking started, then the beatings. He didn't just want a wife, Clara Ara whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. He wanted a possession. Then she revealed the part of the story that made Tennyson's blood freeze. When I was pregnant with Teotzin, he lost all our money gambling. He was in debt to dangerous men. He started talking about the baby, how a baby could be useful to pay his debts. Her voice broke. The night Teotzin was born, Baltazar came home drunk. He was angry it was a boy. He said a girl would have been worth more later on. What did he mean? Tennyson asked, his voice tight. Clara Ara looked at him, her eyes filled with a horror he was only just beginning to understand. He was going to sell him, Tennyson. Not as a baby. He was going to give him to the men he owed money to, as collateral. To be raised by them, to work for them. To become one of them. Naokani placed a hand on Clara Ara's arm. And what happened then? He beat me, she said, her voice flat. He broke 2 of my ribs. Nayeli saw it all. The next day, while he was passed out, I took the children and I ran. I thought we had escaped. But a week ago, in the woods, I saw him. He was talking to someone, his sister, Soledad. She owns the cantina in town. They were looking for us. So, the hunter had allies. He wasn't just some lone, abusive husband. He was connected, and his sister was right here in San Pedro. A cold dread washed over Tennyson. Baltazar hadn't just been watching the cabin. He had been planning. Clara Ara, he said, his voice low and urgent. What do these men he owes money to do? Who are they? She shook her head. I don't know. Bandits, smugglers. All I know is that Baltazar was more afraid of them than he was of the law. He said they had invested in him. Now it was all clear. Teotzin wasn't just a son Baltazar wanted back out of pride. The baby was a business asset, a piece of property to settle a debt, and Baltazar would stop at nothing to get him back. He will not have him, Tennyson said. It was not a promise. It was a vow, but what they didn't know was that it was already too late. Soledad had sent word, and Baltazar wasn't coming back alone. He arrived like a storm front, dark and menacing. Baltazar Herrera rode into San Pedro del Monte on a stolen horse, flanked by 2 men whose faces looked like they'd been carved from rock and malice. He didn't come to plead his case. He came to claim his property. His first stop was his sister's cantina. Soledad was wiping down the bar, her face a mask of hard-won survival. Brother, she said, not looking at him, you got my message. Where is she? Baltazar growled, slamming his hand on the bar. With the Apache, outside of town. Soledad finally met his gaze. Baltazar, the woman is different. She looks strong. The townspeople respect the Indian. This won't be easy. I don't need it to be easy, he sneered. I need it to be done. She is mine. The boy is mine, and the girl will come too. She's old enough now to be useful. A flicker of something, fear or maybe disgust, crossed Soledad's face. But it was gone in an instant. She knew her brother. She knew the darkness he carried. "The town is divided," she said, her voice low. "Don Ezekiel, the scribe, he speaks well of the Apache. But Don Geronimo and his ranch hands, they hate all Indians. They will listen to you." Baltazar smiled. It was the smile of a wolf. "Good. Then they'll hear a story." And what a story it was. That afternoon, Baltazar stood in the center of the cantina and spun a tale of a loving husband, heartbroken and desperate. He told the crowd how the savage Apache had crept into his home, bewitched his fragile wife, and stolen his precious children. He painted himself as the victim, a man searching for his stolen family. "My poor Clara Ara," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "She is his prisoner, too terrified to escape. God only knows what that animal is doing to her and my children." The lies took root in the fertile soil of fear and prejudice. Don Geronimo and his men were the first to pledge their support, their hatred for the Apache now given a righteous cause. By nightfall, half the town was convinced that Tennyson was a kidnapper and a monster. Meanwhile, at the cabin, an uneasy peace reigned. But Tennyson felt the shift in the wind. He knew the hunter was no longer hiding in the shadows. He was gathering his pack. That afternoon, while teaching Nellie how to track a deer, he found something that confirmed his fears. A fresh cigar, the kind favored by the men in town, stubbed out on a rock overlooking his property. They were being watched constantly. He had to get a message to Naokani. He needed her wisdom, her knowledge of the old ways of a fight that was coming. But he couldn't leave Clara Ara and the children alone. He decided to trust Nayeli. "Little warrior," he said to her that evening, "I need you to do something very brave. I need you to take a message to Naokani." He drew a map in the dirt, showing her a hidden path through the hills, a way that would avoid the main road. "Tell her the hunter is here. Tell her he has brought the wolves of the town with him. She will know what it means." Nellie looked at the map, her face serious. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. "I will not fail," she said. Early the next morning, before the sun had risen, the small girl slipped out of the cabin and into the woods, a message that held all their lives tucked into her dress. But she was seen. One of Baltazar's men, a man named Crisanto, was watching the cabin. He saw the child leave and followed her, thinking she was running an errand. But when she took the hidden path into the hills, his suspicion grew. He followed her for miles, all the way to Naokani's camp. He hid in the rocks, listening as the child delivered her message. He heard Naokani's grim response. "The white man brings his law," the old woman said. "But the Apache brings his own justice. Tell Tennyson to be ready. The spirits of the ancestors are watching." Crisanto hurried back to town, his mind racing. He told Baltazar everything. "They're planning something, boss. The old witch and the Indian. They're not going to follow the law." Baltazar's eyes gleamed. "Perfect," he said. This was exactly what he wanted. He didn't want a legal battle he might lose. He wanted a fight he could win, a fight where he could paint Tennyson as a violent savage. "They want to play by Apache rules? Fine, we'll give them a war." He went straight to Don Geronimo. "The Apache is gathering his people," he lied, his voice filled with urgency. "They're planning to attack the town. They have my family hostage. We have to get them out, tonight." The fuse had been lit. Don Ezekiel, the elderly village scribe, heard the rumors. He had known Tennyson for 5 years and respected him. He had also known Baltazar for years and distrusted him completely. He knew a story had 2 sides, and Baltazar's side smelled of whiskey and lies. Under the pretense of delivering a letter, he rode out to the cabin. What he saw there only deepened his conviction. He found a home, not a prison. He saw Clara Ara, no longer a ghost, but a woman with light in her eyes. He saw Nayeli, bright and unafraid. He saw the baby, Teayotzin, healthy and happy. And he saw Tennyson, not as a captor, but as a protector. "Don Ezekiel," Tennyson said, his face grim, "you should not have come. It is not safe here." "That is what I came to find out," the old man replied. He looked at Clara Ara. "Baltazar is in town. He says he's come to rescue you." Clara Ara's hand instinctively went to Teayotzin, who was playing at her feet. "I will not go back," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will die first." "It may come to that," Tennyson said quietly. "He has convinced half the town we are a threat. They are gathering men." Don Ezekiel's face went pale. "They mean to take you by force." He looked from Tennyson's determined face to Clara Ara's terrified one. "Then you must not be here when they come. You must come to town. You must face him in front of the judge. It's your only chance." "They will not give us a fair hearing," Tennyson argued. "To them, I am just an Apache." "Then let them see the man, not the Apache," Don Ezekiel insisted. "Let the judge see this family. Let him hear Clara Ara's voice. It is a risk, but staying here is certain death." As they spoke, a plume of smoke rose from the distant hills. It was a signal. Nyokani. She was coming. But would she arrive in time? Tennyson looked at Clara Ara. It was her choice. Flee into the wilderness, or stand and fight with words and laws that were not their own. "We go to town," Clara Ara said, her decision made. "I will not let him make me run again. I will face him. I will speak my name." But as they prepared to leave, Tennyson noticed something. Nayeli was gone. She hadn't returned from her mission to Nyokani. A cold fear gripped him. Where was his little warrior? Had Baltazar's men found her? The truth was far worse. Nayeli had seen Crisanto following her. On her way back from Nyokani's camp, she had set a trap, a simple snare she had learned from Tennyson. Crisanto, clumsy and arrogant, had walked right into it. He was now dangling upside down from a tree, cursing. Nayeli hadn't run for help. She had walked up to the trapped man, her face calm. "You work for Baltazar," she stated. "Let me down, you little devil," he spat. "You are going to take a message to him for me," she said, her voice devoid of any childish fear. "You are going to tell him that Clara Ara Mendoza is not afraid of him anymore. And you are going to tell him that if he wants a war, he should know that even the smallest warrior can set a trap." She left him there, hanging in the woods. She thought she had sent a message of defiance, but all she had done was sign their death warrant. When Crisanto finally managed to cut himself down and stumble back to town, bruised and humiliated, he was burning with rage. He told Baltazar that the little girl had attacked him, that she was a wild animal just like the rest of them. This was the final piece of propaganda Baltazar needed. "You see," he roared to the assembled crowd in the plaza, "even their children are violent. They are savages. They have my family, and now they are preparing for war. We ride now. We ride to save my family and protect this town." Don Geronimo and his men let out a cheer. They grabbed their rifles and torches. A mob hungry for violence was born. They were marching toward the cabin, a wave of fire and hate, and Tennyson, Clara Ara, and Teayotzin were riding straight towards them. They met on the dusty road a mile from town. The mob saw them first, the Apache on his horse, the woman behind him clutching her baby. It was the exact image Baltazar had painted for them, a captor and his prisoner. "There he is!" Don Geronimo shouted, raising his rifle. "The kidnapper! Hold your fire!" a voice boomed. It was Judge Mendoza, who had been summoned by a frantic Don Ezekiel. He rode his mule between the mob and the family, his hand held high. "There will be no bloodshed here. This is a matter for the law." Baltazar pushed his way to the front. "Your Honor, this savage has my wife and son. He must be stopped." "I am not his wife." Clara Ara's voice rang out, clear and strong, silencing the crowd. She slid off the horse, standing tall, with Teyotzin in her arms. My name is Clara Ara Mendoza, and I am not a prisoner. I am a survivor. The crowd murmured, confused. This was not the terrified, bewitched woman Baltazar had described. She's lying, Baltazar screamed. He's brainwashed her. Then let us hear her story, the judge declared. Here, now, in the eyes of God and this town. What followed was a trial held in the middle of a dirt road with a jury of angry men holding torches. Baltazar went first, repeating his lies, his voice dripping with false sincerity. He was a good husband, a loving father, his life destroyed by a savage. Then it was Clara Ara's turn. She looked not at the judge, but at the faces of the townsfolk, the men and women she had lived amongst. And she told them the truth. She spoke of the beatings, the fear, the night she ran for her life. She showed them a faint scar on her wrist. "This is a gift from my loving husband," she said, her voice heavy with irony. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. They had heard the rumors about Baltazar's temper, his gambling. But Don Geronimo wasn't convinced. "It's her word against his," he grumbled. "And he is one of us. That man is an Apache." The tide was turning back against them. It seemed prejudice would win over truth. And then they heard a sound. A rhythmic chanting coming from the hills. Nyokani had arrived. But she wasn't alone. Behind her walked 24 Apache men and women, their faces stern, their eyes fixed on the crowd. They were not armed for war. They carried no rifles, no bows. They simply came and stood behind Tennyson, a silent wall of support. But their presence terrified the townsfolk. It looked exactly like the invasion Baltazar had warned them about. "You see?" he shouted, seizing the moment. "They've come to attack us! It was a trap all along!" Panic began to spread. Don Geronimo's men raised their rifles again. The standoff was about to explode into a massacre. "Wait!" A small voice cut through the tension. Nayeli emerged from the crowd. She must have slipped past them in the confusion. She wasn't looking at the mob or the judge. She was staring directly at Baltazar. "You are not my father," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of truth. "A father does not try to sell his children." A gasp went through the crowd. "What is this nonsense?" Baltazar blustered, his face turning red. "I heard you," Nayeli continued, taking a step forward. "In the woods. You were talking to the bad men you owe money to. You told them they could have Teyotzin. You said he would work off your debt." She turned to the judge. "He doesn't want a son, Your Honor. He wants a slave." This was a twist no one expected. The accusation hung in the air, deadly and specific. "It's a lie!" Baltazar roared, lunging for Nayeli. "The little brat is lying!" Tennyson moved faster than anyone had ever seen him move. He intercepted Baltazar, throwing him back. The two men stood face to face, the hatred between them crackling like lightning. "The child speaks the truth," a new voice said. It was Soledad, Baltazar's sister. She stepped out of the cantina, her face pale. "I heard him too. I've been covering his debts, his crimes, for years. But no more. He is not a man. He is a monster." The betrayal from his own sister broke Baltazar. The crowd stared, stunned into silence. Don Ezekiel stepped forward and handed the judge a stack of papers. "And here, Your Honor, are the letters to the money lenders proving it. He offered his own son as property." Baltazar was trapped. His lies had unraveled completely. He looked around, his eyes wild with cornered rage. He saw the faces of the townsfolk turned against him. He saw the stern Apache warriors. He saw the judge, his face like thunder. And then he saw Teyotzin in Clara Ara's arms. His property. With a primal scream, he drew a hidden knife and lunged toward Clara Ara and the baby. But he never made it. An arrow, fired from the back of the Apache ranks, flew through the air with impossible speed and accuracy. It struck Baltazar in the shoulder, not to kill, but to stop. He dropped the knife screaming in pain and collapsed in the dust. Naokani stepped forward, a longbow still humming in her hand. "Apache justice," she said, her voice calm and cold. The fight was over. Judge Mendoza declared Tennyson and Clara Ara a legal family and issued a warrant for Baltazar's arrest for a dozen crimes. The mob, ashamed and silent, dispersed. As the sun set, the two groups, the townsfolk and the Apache, stood on the road, separated by a chasm of mistrust. But in the middle stood a new family, forged in fire and truth. Nayeli walked to Tennyson. "I promised I would pay you back," she said. Tennyson knelt down and looked the little girl in the eyes. "Little warrior," he said softly, "you already have." He was wrong. Her payment was just beginning. 15 years later, San Pedro del Monte was a changed town. The dusty road was now a bustling street, and the chasm between the two cultures had become a bridge. The cabin where Tennyson once lived alone was now a sprawling home, with a workshop where he and a now 16-year-old Teayotzin taught both Apache and Mexican boys the art of woodworking. Clara Ara, using her own story as a beacon, had started a shelter for women and children, a safe harbor for those fleeing storms like the one she had survived. And Nayeli? Nayeli had kept her promise in a way that would change their world forever. She returned from her studies in the capital on the day of her 22nd birthday. She stepped off the coach, no longer a little girl, but a confident woman, carrying a heavy leather briefcase. Her family was there to greet her, their faces etched with pride. That evening, she gathered them all: Tennyson, Clara Ara, Teotzin, and even the now elderly Naokani. "I made a promise a long time ago," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I promised to pay a debt for a bowl of milk." She opened her briefcase. It wasn't filled with money. It was filled with legal documents, maps, and treaties. "For 5 years," she announced, "I have been working with the territorial government. Tennyson, you were sent here on a mission to build a bridge between our people, but a bridge must be built on solid ground." She unrolled a large, official-looking map. "This," she said, her finger tracing a wide expanse of land that included the town and the surrounding hills, "is a land grant. It officially recognizes the ancestral rights of the Tubac Apache. It guarantees your tribe permanent legal ownership. No one can ever push your people off their land again." Tennyson stared at the document, his eyes shining. His life's mission, the sacrifice he had made, had been completed not by him, but by the little girl he had saved. "But that's not all," Nayeli said, a smile playing on her lips. She pulled out another document. "The grant comes with a condition: that a school be built here for both Apache and Mexican children to be educated together." She looked at her mother. "A school to be funded by the town and run by the women's shelter you founded." Clara Ara gasped, tears streaming down her face. Teotzin wrapped his strong arms around his sister. Nayeli had not just paid her debt, she had invested it. The single act of kindness, the bowl of milk, had yielded a future for 2 entire peoples. But there was one last piece of business. The next day, Nayeli walked into the main store. Don Silvano, the old shopkeeper who had first told Don Ezekiel to check on the family, was still there, frail but with kind eyes. "I owe you a debt," Nayeli said, placing a small, heavy pouch of coins on the counter. The old man looked confused. 15 years ago, my mother tried to buy milk here," she explained. "She had no money. You told her to come back later. You trusted her. You were the first person in this town to show us kindness." Tears filled the old man's eyes as he remembered. "Child, that was nothing." "It was everything," Nayeli insisted. "Here is the price of the milk with 15 years of interest." Don Silvano pushed the pouch back. "I will not take it. Your family has paid this town back 1,000 times over." "Then," Nayeli said, "let's invest it." Together, they used the money to create a fund, a small charity to ensure that no mother in San Pedro del Monte would ever again have to watch her child go hungry. The promise was finally, truly, paid in full. Years later, visitors to the thriving, peaceful town would hear the story of the Apache diplomat, the brave mother, and the monster she escaped. But the story they all loved the best was about the little girl who made a promise that grew from a single bowl of milk into a legacy of hope, a bridge between worlds, and a testament to the fact that the most powerful debts are those paid with love. If you enjoyed this story and believe that one small act of kindness can change the world, don't forget to like and subscribe. You never know what stories are waiting just around the corner.